if anyone from the audience has a question, we'd love to take that first. And if not, we'll come right back to you.
Sure, Eddie.
Oh.
I'm Jim Frazier. I'm the Vice President of Smart Cities here at ARC. It seems as if there's a range of parking technology solutions out there. There's the kiosk, there's parking elevators, there's the AI system of CloudParc. What do I do first in assessing what technology fits my application? How do I even begin that planning or examination process?
Sure. Thank you. I think, really much of it, being a prior municipal employee, the mindset was if you try to take on the initiative yourself and try to move it forward yourself as a municipality without having that stakeholder input, you're going to find yourself in a position where you may have invested a lot of time, research, infrastructure on this, only to have your constituents, your stakeholders, not understand it, feel like they weren't involved in the process, and oftentimes that could then lead to bad PR, removal. There are things like that. So I think it's really driven by the community stakeholder meetings. And I, a lot of my experience on the consulting side now has been in second or third tier cities, let's call it, to where maybe they're not so smart cities right now, but they see what some of the smarter cities are trying to accomplish. And so I just liken it as a very simplistic approach to it. Everybody sees all these solutions out there, but not all these solutions are right for that particular demographic or that particular location. So you really have to understand, I think, that piece first before you even consider where you need to go.
Well, Jim, Bob, and I were talking earlier, across the country, there's just a range of municipal parking programs in different states. For instance, there are some large municipal parking operations that have single space meters and still don't accept credit card and don't have any apps. And then there are some that are pretty far along in the process. So I think it just depends on the sensitivities of that community, looking at the needs and through the stakeholder engagement process of helping them determine the direction of where they want to go with their program, how it's going to best serve the community.
And to a certain degree, ensuring that you're kind of future-proofing it a little bit, right? You're not installing something that's not going to really move forward with technology and with the trends, but you have to get your stakeholders around it, to your point, Jim. I mean, you really need to educate them, because if you educate the stakeholders and get them comfortable and have those meetings and explain, because everybody's going to have an opinion on parking, there's no doubt about that, but if you can prove it out with some data and show them how it's going to benefit them, and it's a win-win for the community, I think that's one of the biggest things. And actually putting some of that money back into the community if you're a municipality, right? So that parking money, if it just gets dumped into a general fund and is a black hole, but if some of that comes back to those merchants or those stakeholders and streetscape or things that are important to them, then I think you start to have a nice ecosystem that involves parking and they can help further it. It's not just on the front end. I mean, Jason's been to probably, 30 stakeholder engagement meetings plus in Atlanta, and we continue to do that because if you're going to evolve the system, you have to keep engaging them. It's not static. That's what it used to be. Now it's what are we doing in 2019? I mean, what are we doing in 2020? We need to keep moving the bar. That's what our goal always is.
Yeah, even to your point about the stakeholder engagement meetings, in a city like Atlanta where we have a really great operation, it's a large 16 square mile footprint, and within that system, different neighborhoods and different communities have different parking problems. So what works in the downtown core by the government center isn't going to work in an offsite, kind of neighborhood small business environment. The solution there isn't going to be the same as it is in other areas. So it's really working with the stakeholders, trying to develop an understanding of the parking pressures that they have, the generators, and custom building a program that fits that need.
And the other thing is, kind of as you're progressing it, the streetscape changes, right? So dynamics change, the types of businesses change, so you have to always be looking at that and looking forward to how, even as we say, one area needs something today, next year it may need something completely different, and making sure you're ahead of that and evolving it.
And I think a broader theme in digital transformation, kind of worldwide is it's not technology first. You guys are saying it's stakeholder needs first in the local situation. One small city might have a quarter operated meter, like you said, and the other might be already kind of halfway there. So you need to sort of meet them in the middle and see what people actually need. Okay, so let's go from there. So Dana, you brought up a really good point during your demo where, yes, your system with machine vision and machine learning is great for parking, but going forward, we're going to be needing curbside management solutions, and that's an absolutely natural partner. Mm-hmm. So have you been, or do you know of activities in this space between municipalities and parking companies to actually use their tech for curbside management?
That's a good question. I think there are technologies out there that are doing some curbside management, but it's still developing. And I think what's interesting is that you've got about the CloudParc model is that it can see. It's got the eyes to actually see the curb, and where there's sensors that can be there, they don't tell the full story of what's going on the curb. So, and then you've got pay stations which can monitor to a certain degree and may be connected to another technology. But I think when it comes to real curbside management, you really need you need some kind of sensor or camera technology that can give you the data you want. So it all depends on if you're collecting, let's say, okay, if you want to know how many drop-offs and pickups of Lyft there are, how are you going to be able to do that? Because there is no set spot. In most places, there is no set spot for a pickup and drop off. You don't know how long they're in that spot unless somebody's constantly monitoring that spot. And what if it's a weird spot that they're blocking? And what if it's a double parked spot? Right. And nobody really tracks the double park spot except for the law enforcement. Right. And so I think depending on what your idea of curbside management is and what kind of data you want to collect will determine what kind of technology you want to have.
Right. So there could be some overlay down the line, and there definitely will be, but it's going to really vary by the situation.
Right. And I mean, CloudParc plays well to that because, like I said, it picks up the whole story. It knows the exact time, what kind of vehicle it was, who it was, and then, from there you can do whatever you want with that. Right.
Mm-hmm. So in curbside management, I think, as we know, is going to be just bigger and bigger as we go along here. We had a session this morning where a gentleman from the city of St. Augustine was talking about mobility as a service, right? So as we go forward, private car ownership is going to taper off, and we'll be relying on these roving fleets. So eventually that means lower private car usage, but also lower parking revenues for the city. So he was talking about how do you actually monetize the curbside for pickup and drop off from e-commerce, from Uber, Lyft, from all those guys.
Well, you can also monetize the street. So if you're monitoring the street and you're picking up street data, you can certainly charge for the usage of the street.
Yes.
So
congestion pricing.
You can charge for usage of the sidewalk. So anything on the street that you can collect data on, you could charge.
Mm-hmm. It's a good point. I mean, they're all city assets, and private citizens and companies are using them, and it's, you could say it's free, but there's a book out there called The High Price of Free Parking. And it's an economist who looked at this and said, when most cities undercharge for, say, street parking, sure, you're only paying $2 an hour instead of the actual value of maybe $8. But you and everyone around you are paying for it by circling, by your congestion, by your stress, your time, your money, and everything else. So you're paying one way or the other, and to actually maybe properly allocate that value, like you're saying, like Singapore has been doing, for example, you really address some of these big macro issues in cities. So that's great. Okay, so, and I guess I touched on it very briefly just now. The gentleman from St. Augustine mentioned it. Well, we all know mobility as a service is coming and is slowly growing. And how do you guys feel about that impacting the parking business in the medium and longer term?
I'll take this one again. I think the key is, and I didn't really get the chance to talk as much about the last slide I had up in my presentation piece there, but I think it's the industry certainly needs to embrace it. This idea of possibly turning ground floor access to parking decks into kind of multimodal centers, to where now you are getting people coming from a far distance to kind of a park once scenario, and then they're using that mobility service that may be offered at the ground level of that parking facility to get that last mile force in. And so, you know, again, I keep referencing the city of Tampa. It's a peninsula, it's landlocked, and there's been several discussions about the city never building another parking garage in its downtown core because the value of land is so much, and they're trying to create a dense, walkable downtown. So what does that mean? Does that mean that, you know, you're relying on this rail transportation that's supposed to come at some day to get people to kind of that core area? Or do you just simply start looking at kind of these remote parking areas and having that transit, that mobility service bring you into the downtown core? Because certainly, you know, Florida is a very car-centric state, and the automobile is not going anywhere anytime soon in this state. So it's something that definitely has to be factored in.
Yeah, I think, you know, we think to Dana's point, it's managing the curb. It's the most valuable spaces in the system. So, and also to your point, it could differ from block to block. So you could have blocks that need to be regulated for loading zones, other ones that might be drop-offs for Uber, Lyft. You may have other ones that are purely paid parking, time parking, residential parking. We have a lot of operations where we do the residential parking programs and getting those to coexist side by side. So it's always still going to be, for the foreseeable future, managing the curb. I don't think we're going to see the cars go away. It's not there, and it's probably not something on the roadmap to plan for in our systems right now. But certainly it's to start to see if things do evolve, to be ready to go there.
But I think when it comes to mobility as a service, it's changing, you know, what has traditionally been the focus on the transaction point, you know, at that 9x30 stall. In that one instance, it's now from the start of the trip to the destination. So parking is just a part of that. And through, you know, the technology that we engage in, you know, systems like a CloudParc, where it's a single source and they have the app and everything's a link together. You know, how are we providing value to the customer to get them to engage in that system and have a better experience? And with that, creating better, you know, civic centers and downtowns.
And when you start to talk about autonomous vehicles, that doesn't mean parking goes away. And as Bob pointed out, also, you know, the drop-off and pickups will always be valuable, but also those cars have to go somewhere. And they would probably be more like a valet service. You want your car, you want it now, and people still will probably want to live out of their car and use their own private AV. So these cars have to go somewhere. They still are going to have drop off and pick up, and some things will never go away.
Mm-hmm.
And it's managing it to that space. I mean, you spoke right in the beginning. You said, I don't know if I want to go to downtown Boston because am I going to find a space? So managing the pricing, managing the curb, so you have 85% occupancy at any given time. So there will be some space. And it's getting to that point and getting the system to be there. So you feel comfortable that you're going to grab your app, you're going to find a place to park, you're going to park, you're going to go. You're not going to not even go to a pay station. We prefer folks don't go to pay stations. And we could see in the future that they're very limited.
Mm-hmm.
There's an alternative. You'll always need them some places, but you're not going to need them nearly as much.
So there's go ahead, please.
Well, I was going to say more immediately than, you know, the idea of mobility as a service is how this technology is going to help us improve the commercial functions of a city. Whereas now the delivery vehicles and things like that are a big part of the congestion issue. But going beyond just helping them get into a space, this idea of the way that we engage with them now in a punitive, issue a citation versus set up accounts and bill them for usage. It also is a way to monetize the curb in a different way, in that we could, prioritize loading zones for certain companies or things like that, and people could buy certain access. And I think that is something that we'll see, in the very near term.
Right.
Eddie, I have a question.
Please.
Well, first the comment. I think the autonomous vehicle situation is fascinating, because I've seen studies where if you set your parking fee too high, then all of a sudden your autonomous vehicles just circle the block, all of them, and nobody moves. But I like a question. This is clearly evolutionary, and we're going from pay meters with quarters to kiosks to phone apps. And I happen to anecdotally live in South Florida, where it bothers me that, Boca, Deerfield, Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood, all have different applications. And now I know if I go to Atlanta, well, guess what? I could shop. Now I have to shop for the one space that I want, because it's available probably at 4 different price points from 4 different vendors. That sets up, my question about interoperability and future-proofing this, and making it not only a smooth transaction for the municipality or their parking structure owner, but also for the customer. How smooth is that becoming? And is it really future-proofed, or do I have to every few years just start from scratch?
So to address the idea of the different rates by the different companies, in a municipality, the city will set the rate. So all those providers have to charge the same rate per hour. The difference would be in the fee that you pay per transaction. So one person might charge 35 cents per transaction, and another app might charge 25 cents, but the base charge will always be the same. As far as future-proofing, when we're working on these municipal programs and we're trying to build out this infrastructure in this back office, we're trying to create a space where we can bring in multiple apps, new technology. We're trying to make it where we're flexible. And even if people have things that they'd like to test, we've been engaged for, Visa and connected cars and things like that. We're trying to create a system that folks could come in and they can participate, and then it allows the customer to decide which they want to use. And within that, hopefully those folks who are creating these products are going to continue to evolve, but our base system allows them to come in and be a part of it.
When you do your initial studies, I've seen studies where parking that is too low cost is actually a negative driver to local businesses, because they want to see turnover in cars. Do you ever look at that economic aspect or does the municipality, as they set pricing?
Well, I was going to say, sure, and we were just talking about this a little bit earlier with Jim's history in the city of Tampa. A lot of that is set politically. It's a legislative issue when it comes to changing rates. It's something that's written in the code. The on-street parking environment isn't as flexible as maybe the commercial environment, which is unfortunate. It would be great to be able to kind of see what kind of rates are being charged in off-street and adjust ours accordingly on-street. And that way we're incentivizing those people who are long-term parkers to go and find spaces that aren't the most valuable or most desirable. I think a big part of what Bob and I do in any city that we work in, no matter the size, is trying to work on solutions to find where the employees park, because they're going to be there for extended times. And if you don't have the right regulation or the right rates, they are going to be taking those most valuable spaces, one, because they use the system every day and they kind of know how it works. And then plus they want to be able to walk right to the storefront that they work in. So, we're a little bit dependent on the politics of a municipality and how willing they are to adjust rates or give some flexibility to the transportation people there to go ahead and respond.
Yeah, there's a few ways to look at that too. We've had it where the rate will go up, and then you're still going to have some folks that say, while it went up, we had it, it made our businesses tank. It was bad. So we've had the city pull their sales tax revenue for the area. And, it went up actually since we raised the price. So there's other ways to look at that beyond the parking rate, if you will. And I think, looking in that type of, format, going just beyond our data helps drive that. And then we also look at, you could start to, because of technology, we can start to look at occupancy. So if we're seeing occupancy and stagnation and circling, you could start to put those areas in buckets and say, okay, if it gets over this point, it's on the radar to have a rate increase. And then you might have 6 months before you're going to act on that. And if it's still the same data, then you're going to increase it. Conversely, you may have areas where you want those cars to go, maybe the rate's too high. And so you're going to say that's going to go in a bucket to lower the price. Because a lot of places, by and large, we're not to dynamic pricing, right? We're not to that point where folks are comfortable with, well, at 2 o'clock, it's going up as the rate's up. We've got too many cars on the street. But you could certainly start to get towards that, right? By studying areas and then moving the rates in a logical way. And just benchmarking. I think that's a big part of it.
Right, so it's kind of incremental in that way. Oh, Dana, please.
Yeah, I just want to comment on the pricing and new technology. One of the things that you can do with new technology that you couldn't do before is actually drive behavior with the pricing, not just on demand and congestion, but let's just say you want to. You want people to move faster. So, okay, so the limit here is a 2-hour limit of parking. Then instead of issuing a ticket, every minute that goes by the 2 hours gets more and more expensive. But then you can also do the reverse. If they move quicker, you can bonus them. Now, this is something you could never do before. So if they stay under an hour, maybe their parking gets cheaper and cheaper. So if you want them to drive low emissions car, maybe they get special rates with their parking. So these are all things that you can do to drive behavior and then benefit from that.
One other thing would be, it all kind of goes back to Jason's point about the city code. So there's some cities that have moved to where at least there's some levity there. So it's a not to exceed number in both ways, right? So if the parking is currently $2 an hour, staff or someone in the city has the ability to raise that up to, let's say, $5 an hour without going back to council. And they have the ability to lower that to whatever, I don't know what the number is, 50 cents, let's say, if they're trying to drive folks to a different area. And it makes it a little more fluid because no one wants to go back to council every time they want to change a rate. And I think there needs to be a move. I mean, I know we both have pushed that in Atlanta for them to move to that so it could be more fluid. We're not trying to reinvent the wheel every time we want to change something up incrementally a buck.
No, we had a question from the audience.
I had a number of comments, please. Yes, as Jim and I chatted before, I used to manage the parking system in Orlando, or the personal manager that worked for me. So a lot of these issues are issues that we've dealt with or have been dealing with continually, and it's a process. Like you said, stakeholder engagement. You've got to be talking to the business community on an ongoing basis, not a one-off thing. It's got to be a regular series of meetings. They've got to be understanding your revenues. You've got to be understanding their revenues, their business functions, and different zones in a downtown. Different zones are different at different times of day. And I disagree with you a little bit. One of you said we're not there with demand pricing. We're there. We're there, and some of the business people, they want to do that too, because they want to make sure that if there is a takeout pizza place, that someone can get in and out of there. And they don't want the evening traffic that should be parking in a garage taking up that space. And Dana kind of got closer to it when she talked about incentivizing people for, using that space less. As to one of the earlier comments, about the ride-hailing services and so on, reducing the cars that we're going to be driving? I don't necessarily think so. I think it's just going to give us more options. And I think there might be a whole lot more vehicle trips with autonomous vehicles and ride-hailing services together. I think we are going to, be able to have that extra drink because we're not going to be pulled over anymore because we have that autonomous vehicle. So we may, go out and have more drinks. There are elderly people, younger people, and so on who cannot drive right now who are going to be making trips. So I think you're likely to see just more options and a lot more trip making, needing to have a more complex approach to parking, not just parking your regular vehicle or your autonomous vehicle, but staging vehicles. I think that's going to be a huge thing where we stage vehicles. So those are my comments. I hope you found them interesting.
Thank you. We appreciate it. And to your point there about, autonomous vehicles not really decreasing the number of trips driven, well, there's a parallel with when Uber and Lyft started. Vehicle miles on roads in cities increased dramatically. And there's even a parallel with when automobiles came on the scene 100 years ago in the first place. People said the horse and buggy is out, the entire transport industry is on its head, but actually people began accessing transport far more when it became cheaper, more convenient. So that's a great point. Something I will mention, going back to your presentation, Bob and Jason, you brought up the idea of, okay, if I'm a visitor to, say, the city of Atlanta, I might drive in, park, and maybe, you can have this great app for me to interact with your parking system, as we talked about, but why stop there? I love the idea of having that as the introduction to Smart Atlanta, some marketing for the city, and then what have you. So can you just elaborate on that? That's a really good thought.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I kind of feel like, some of the questions that we've talked about were about parking's role in this, and is parking going to eventually go away, with all this technology? But I think, it's just an evolving role where that we're going to have to get very creative, when it comes to, how we interact with autonomous vehicles in 30 years. But, really now when that experience of having to pay for parking disappears and becomes something automatic, we're going to have to look for ways to create value. So whether it's, trying to work part of our stakeholder engagement, staying in touch with our retail establishments and restaurants and trying to work with them to participate in these apps in ways that they can offer promo codes that are, relevant to the folks that are parking on their block. So how granular can you get that if you pull up, we all, well, I don't know if we all, but sometimes I'll look at a pair of shoes online and then I'll see it on another site, in a day from now. Will a customer who went to an Asian restaurant one night pull up on a block and there's one there, and their parking app will tell them, hey, if you want to go over here and have some sushi, you can get $2 off, or they'll validate this parking transaction for you. So I think there's interesting ways where marketing and getting some community participation in that system are going to be important. But then I also think broader to that, that idea of leaving, your house or your business, and how do you get to that destination? There's going to be things like wayfinding once you get out of the transportation and you're on your foot. How you interact with that last mile transportation of things like the scooters and the bike share systems. I just think there's going to be opportunities there that we can kind of enhance and provide value to our customers in a way that we're not engaging them right now. I think there's much more area there where we can create an interactive system through technology that everybody kind of gets to participate in.
On that subject, I have a question. We have a range of technologies from relatively simple to very sophisticated. How much data is created over those range of solutions? How is that analyzed, if it is? And how best is that monetized?
Pretty loaded question. And it depends on the technology. With machine learning, it only picks up what it's supposed to pick up. So that would be the data. So if, for example, a city just specifically only wants parking occupancy. And then that's all it would pick up. And depending on what the process is in that city, whether the city wants that data or it wants the company to handle it, and how they want it to be distributed. So with machine learning, with CloudParc, it picks up data, digests it, distributes it, and even acts on it. But it doesn't have to. So again, what's happened is you've got these wonderful technologies, and the question is, are they cookie cutter or are they custom designed? And every municipality is different, but not only that, every block is different, every piece of, you've got in one city, residential area, business district, and industrial district. So it all has to be customized going forward, is my opinion.
Well, even I was just sort of thinking that even in the simplest parking applications that have a payment app in my phone, if it includes wayfinding, now there's a whole set of other IoT data there that might give me a coupon that increases the closer I get to the Starbucks, or things like that. And that's all monetizable information. It's not just is the space occupied or not. That's once I'm out of my car on foot. There's also the connected vehicle piece that is supported by some GM vehicles today, Ford very soon, Toyota very soon, that there might be a connection there where the parking system makes a connection with the vehicle as you're circling the garage, and tells you how many spaces are available, where is the space, it's on level 2, and if you drive to level 5, you might even get a discount.
It's a good point. It will be interesting. I think we're kind of all reliant at this point, or looking forward to the advancement of the automobile's connected abilities. And does that necessarily mean that at someday the infrastructure for the parking payment, the kiosks, the entry-exit equipment as you pull into a parking structure, does that all go away someday? There are obviously beliefs that it will go away, and that all of those payment and identification will be handled through that connected vehicle, the dash component, the smart system within the vehicle. I think that's probably a pretty good reality. It's a question of when. You have to begin to look at the life cycle of the vehicle and how rapid that occurs over time. But I think, I've always been a big proponent that you might see some of that in smaller communities or campuses, where the advancement of that technology is more prevalent than you see kind of mainstream in a downtown municipal area. I don't know if you guys.
Yeah, it's starting to happen. I know we have a city in California that's just putting in, so they have a few new garages they're getting ready to do, and we're not going to put in gated equipment. We're not going to spend, $300,000 to put in that equipment. It's going to be gateless, and it's going to connect with the street. And we're going to make sure that plate identifier is connected through the system. So I think we're there for, I think that it's just people to take the leap into it.
And there's a parallel here between parking and retail, where some retailers are starting these pilots where I have some kind of a identifier on my smartphone. I fill up a shopping cart or bag with whatever I want and walk out, and I'm billed automatically. So there's a parallel here where your connected vehicle does the same thing. So.
Well, I think to the idea that. Go ahead.
Yeah, we've already been talking with our local expressway authority to mimic open road tolling for garages, to use the very same technology and collection methods to just have vehicles just drive in. And what spurred that was event management, people trying to get to a basketball game or a concert or something, and being in a long line when they could just drive into a garage. There's no queue, no delay, and you toll by plate or toll by transponder, and collecting the revenue and sharing it there. So we've already been talking to them about that. That has immense safety benefits for pedestrians also, who get caught up or hampered by the vehicle queues.
Yeah, and to your point, we're also seeing the same thing in an operation we're working on in California that's transit, and again, no gates, and kind of can put that to events, right? Everybody's going to get on the rail pretty much in the morning and they're going to leave in the afternoon. So do we really want a gated system? Do we really want anything that's going to congest folks getting in and out of that facility? So it's the same thing. There's not going to be equipment in the lanes at all for those operations.
I think that's a larger question because I live in South Florida and we have SunPass for Florida Turnpike and a number of other toll roads, but it also magically works at the airport. So I just drive in and I park and it comes out of my bill. Do you see regional coalitions like, Easy Pass or I don't know what they have up here, coming together to manage that?
I know LA Metro is moving to their system right now into where it's tied into their rail and bus system into the parking. It's just evolving into it right now. It's as if we enforce that, it's about 30,000 spaces across 86 locations. So they're just getting to that point. They're installing some LPR at some of the bigger places at their entrances, and the vehicle's the identifier, and it ties to their transit use as to what they can get for their parking in certain areas. So it's kind of cool. I like that they've taken that leap.
But we do hear some of the app partners that were up there. I mean, those are things that they're definitely interested in as part of growing their business and growing their customer base. Is in different cities, how can they link with the transit system? How can they link with the airport parking? How can they, do other kinds of transactions? I don't, as operators, we're trying to, through the multi-app, concept of push more of that back onto them and say, hey, you guys need to kind of be more creative. You guys need to figure out ways to, expand these technologies and grow the customer base and get people using these things. So I don't know how close it is, but it's definitely the things that when they come to us and talk about, what's on the horizon for them and things that they're interested in, is certainly how that they can do more things than just have you buy 2 hours worth of parking.
Probably the only thing that's really slowing it down right now is municipal charters and government agencies that run these tolling systems trying to come to the solution of how do we share that revenue, because there's a cost to provide that service. You mentioned South Florida, Sun Life Stadium's already doing it. They have a half a dozen surface lots where you pull in for a Dolphins game and you just toll right in there. And so I think that was, I remember with the city of Tampa looking at that, and that was, again, it was 7 years ago. But at that time, there was this, how do we make this work financially? And how do we deal with the fact that the tolling system could take it offline at any time for a maintenance period or service period? And how would that affect my ability to capture my revenue? But let's hope that we're moving beyond that type of thought process. But I know that may have been some of the inhibitors to this point to why it's not been as prevalent as it could be in Florida specifically.
The biggest thing is right now, I think they're past most of those things. The biggest thing is just agreeing on, the processing fees. How much of a cut does someone get for collecting and distributing?
So we have about 3 or 4 minutes left now, and I'd be remiss if I didn't bring up cybersecurity, given all the different devices we're talking about in the field. So if you could share any thoughts on that important subject.
Well, the CloudParc collects anonymous data, and it hashtags the license plate. So again, it comes back to what kind of data is actually being picked up and what kind of systems in play, because it can just it does edge computing, but it depends what the municipality has in place.
Well, I was going to say, as operators, SP Plus is very responsible when it comes to financial data. All of our operations are very PCI compliant, and we have divisions devoted to that. When it comes to personal data, we operate in the municipal space, so typically that data is owned by the municipality. We don't access it, we don't deliver it, and it's up to them to develop the policy on what they're, how they protect it and how they distribute it and how long they keep it, things like that.
Jim, did you want to comment?
I hit a mental block there. I don't know that I have anything to contribute at this point, but sorry.
It's completely fine. And you mentioned the municipalities working with you there and mandating this. And the other angle here, I think, is is the public, because you gave us a great demo of what your machine vision system sees, Dana. But there's an angle here where, as a member of the public, you see that and you think Terminator, right? You think Big Brother. So I think an angle here is communicating with the public what you are and aren't capturing. You mentioned edge computing. And so that kind of might put people at ease that, okay, the data is being collected, processed, and not stored in a lot of situations, or a lot of the data has that sort of process. So there's all kinds of angles here.
Yeah, and all cities and states have statutes that are in play for that, in addition to what they have as policies and procedures.
Right, right. So all these different moving pieces are going to be key going forward. But okay, with that, it's 12 o'clock, if you can believe it. If we could give our awesome panelists a round of applause.